Hey, what's up, everybody? Justin Ochoa back with episode 10 of the Gym Sessions podcast. And this week we have on Fredrik Correa. He is the CEO and co founder of Exxentric, which is the company that produces awesome flywheel training products like the kBox, the K pulley, the K meter, and other flywheel training devices such as leg curls and single leg extension flywheels. This was such a good conversation. We went deep into flywheel training, the concept, who it's good for, why it works, how it works. We went into the art and the science into coaching with flywheels, and I learned so much from Fredrik. Even though I use the kBox and I have great experience using the kBox, just learning from him as somebody who has so much more experience in that data behind what the product can do and how you can get the most out of it. That did a lot for me. So I know you guys are going to get a ton of great info from this, whether you are already using flywheels or you're looking into using flywheels. I think this can be a phenomenal resource for you to help you get the most out of your program. So again, this is episode 10. Fredrik Correa, CEO and co-founder of Exxentric. Hope you enjoy. Fredrik, how's it going, man? Thank you so much for joining me on a Friday night. How's everything with you?
Yeah, thanks for having me. Yeah, everything is great. I'm pumped to get going and talk about training. Obviously, it's like my favorite subject. So happy to join you.
Awesome, man. Well, let's jump right in and kind of get the background on who you are, what your current role is, and kind of the stops along the way to help you get to this point in your career, both as a businessman and entrepreneur. But also, I know you're a lifter and athlete as well.
Yeah, so starting from today and why I'm here, it's like I started. I'm one of the co-founders of Exxentric, which founded in 2011. So I've been running that for 10, 11 years, and now I'm the CEO since a couple of years back. And yeah, so that's why I'm doing, and that's why I'm on the show. And we produce flywheel training equipment that's been quite widely spread globally and making some impact. And that's why I'm here. And my story is I was a hockey coach for a bunch of years, and then I went to university. I tried out engineering, dropped out, and then I found this coaching program that focused on ice hockey. So I went to this 2-year coaching program where before that, ice hockey to me was just a game. So I was a technical coach and was like, yeah, if you're a good player, you score goals. So it's all about skills. So going to the university, the coaching University of Health and Sports Science in Stockholm, when you start with anatomy, biomechanics, physiology, I realized that's actually, obviously it's the physical component is so big in any sport that you need to prepare for it. And all these actions like skating, jumping, whatever that I've been working with my players is like to, big extent based on their physical capabilities. So that's sort of, I opened my eyes a little bit more. And it's also coincided for me moving from youth up to elite junior players. So obviously the physical capabilities with youth is more about coordination, agility, and all that stuff. And moving up to the elite juniors, working also a little bit with the federation, with select teams and national teams, younger national teams. And at the coaching program and these like new inputs regarding physiology got me really interested in the physiology, what can we do, how can we prepare, reduce injuries or improve performance. So got me really interested in that part. So after the coaching program, I went to the Karolinska University to study physiology and go deeper into that. And I got in contact with this super interesting group that was working on space, training in space, basically, space research. And that had been a kind of a big problem. If you've seen that old like footage from the 60s, 70s, carrying out astronauts, they realized quite quickly that we can't really handle microgravities. We need to train to counteract those effects. This group at Karolinska, they solved it with using flywheel training because it works in space. So that was their tool, and they were basically looking into like, okay, how if we remove all movement or training for this person, like bed rest studies and or no use studies, basically. So isolating an arm and a leg, and then one arm could train and one couldn't, etc. And they could see like what's the difference. And they used Flywheel to use the training part, and had some really nice results that they could actually unload a limb completely for like 3, 4, 5 weeks, and then just do 3 sets like 3 times a week and still actually build muscle mass, despite that's not being used at all except those sets. So that was kind of cool. And I came there with my ice hockey coach mentality and physiology, and felt like, this is a great tool. We can use it on Earth. So my mind went into there, and I was actually considering going into science, but I ended up going to med school instead, and then worked as a doctor for 10 years. But in parallel, working with that group for a while, I got interested in, I sort of felt like the thing that we're missing down here on Earth was actually products, because they had these like handmade lab products that nobody basically could buy. There was no manual, there was no courses, there were no web page, no web shop, nothing. You couldn't buy them. You could read about them in the paper and maybe find a guy and get a special custom built one, super expensive. So I got into the product development side of it. Like, how can we take this concept and what should we do? Back then they had like isolated fixed fixed devices like leg curl, leg extension, a few devices. So what we started with was the kBox. It's like we need a multi-exercise tool that resonated much better with me working with my ice hockey juniors, because I wanted to do like lifts, pulls, squats, lateral actions, sort of more like weight-based training, similar to that. So that's how it started. So during med school, and as I worked as a doctor, we started Exxentric. Was a little bit of gap there. The timing was right at a later point, so we started Exxentric. Fast forward, we're here today. We grown a little bit, so now my only focus is the company. So since 5 years, I don't work in medicine anymore. And we have about 30 people employed in Sweden and a US subsidiary, so with a US team. So in total, around 35 people.
No, that's cool. I didn't know some of your background, as far as, I always like to do some research on my guests before, but I did not know that you were practicing medicine for so long. I do want to ask just really quickly about that. Was there any like crossover in your career where you're kind of pulling from the medicine side and the product development side as you're kind of starting this journey with like the kBox, or was there any like overlap there where that one helped you and the other, or vice versa?
Yeah, difficult to say. I mean, at the point when I did these directions, like I started with engineering, computer science and engineering, and dropped out, and that felt completely wrong for me. But back then I probably had some interest in engineering, right? Since I picked that, I didn't feel right for me. And then obviously the coaching program, and then physiology, going into research, or like dipping my toe into research, and then medical school, and then working as a doctor. So every step people were like, you're switching directly completely, like again, and again. And you can see my mom, she went crazy, right? Like dropping out of school, becoming a coach, and she's like, oh, ice hockey, come on, why you were going to be an engineer. And then med school, she was happy again. Then I'm working, and then dropping out from med school, working in my company. Then she sat again. So, but looking back now, I can see, like, I feel like I have a pretty good, I don't really know what to change if I wanted a better background to work in a, startup company in the space, sort of tech, tech training realm that we are. Because I mean, I have a use on my sort of early engineering skills and math and that sort of side of thinking, the research part and the physiology part, and obviously the training part, being a coach and understanding how coaches have to work with reality. They have to sort of play the hand that they've been dealt. Like, this is the venue you have, this is the gym you have, maybe these are the players or whatever. Now you need to work with them. They have the skills that they have, and you need to work with that. We can't just, it's not FIFA, right? We can just we have so looking at running the company today, I think I have like, yeah, the mix has been pretty good, but at that, during that, I never saw that was going to happen. But looking back, so that's something I usually tell people when they're still standing at sort of a crossroad. I'm saying like, yeah, I mean, go where your feelings are, or where you think like it's most fun and self-fulfilling, right? Because you don't really know that what might look like a 180 turn right now, looking back in 10 years, could be like the perfect turn that made you, and putting you in a really good position for something else. And maybe you end up where you thought you were going, but you take a detour. And as long as you're like engaged in what you're doing, you're learning, you're meeting new people, you're acquiring new skills, and like that's never bad. And looking back, you would have acquired more skills instead of having that maybe something that is a little bit more boring or something maybe not fulfilling. You're not really evolving. So that would be my take on it.
Yep. No, I love that.
I'm happy I did it
It's
anyway.
always nice to pull from so many different experiences. You know what I mean? Like you said, looking back, you wouldn't change anything because you had the experiences from so many different and diverse environments that all goes into this one thing. And once you found where you were supposed to be, it's like it all came together and clicked. One thing I did wanted to ask was you mentioned with the space research and that they were using flywheels in space. Um, that leads me to an easy question because in space there's no gravity or highly altered gravity, and so traditional weightlifting involves, you know, gravity as kind of that limiting factor, and then something like a kBox or a flywheel doesn't involve gravity because it's using the inertia from the flywheel. So, what like what even led them to turn to that as an avenue of training or exercise in space, or any thoughts on that in general?
Yeah, actually, the story was like there was a couple of people in that group. One guy was like the professor. He had been working in hypertrophy research for quite some time, not with flywheel, but just general looking at hypertrophy. That was his focus, and he was actually recruited by NASA because they looked into different research group that looked into this area and said like, yeah, do you want to help us with some projects? We're trying to solve this issue in space. So he got a little bit involved with them and saw like these are the problems, I mean, and during these times they tested tons of crazy
Yeah.
stuff. I mean, they went with electrical currents, they get with anabolic steroids and rubber bands and all kinds of crazy things, and actually what the EMS, for example, that we have today, with the suits and
Mm.
everything, that started with the Russians. They went like 100% into that. So they built their suits with this, what they call like the Russian current, which is super strong and not very comfortable, right? So today in the EMS, it's much more like toned down, but that back then it was a really strong, hard current, and like integrated in the suit. So they basically like sort of electrocuted them for for like
That's
I
crazy.
think pretty long time, like every day to keep the muscles active, sort of speak. And yeah, so that branched off, and today we have EMS. I mean, we don't use that anymore in space, but yeah. So he actually went around and he did talks about the problems with training in space. And then actually one of the students at the university sort of approached him afterwards, and he had some engineering background, and he's like, yeah, but you should try flywheel. And he's like, what is that? It's like, yeah, I can tell you. So like, yeah, flywheel works like this. They're not based on gravity. It's like, okay, join my group. So he joined that group and did its like PhD with him. So they sort of developed that concept together. And I joined at a later point when it's like already developed, sort of what they had there's like prototype products that they were using.
That's awesome, man. That's a cool
So that's
story.
the story.
That's a
Yeah.
cool story, man. So let's talk about just flywheel training in general for listeners that might not be familiar or just need a refresher. Kind of what's your elevator pitch on what is flywheel training, and what is the concept of it?
Yeah, so the devices can be like anything, right? It could be something, a pulley that you put on a rack and pull into go vertical or horizontal. It can be a box that multi-exercise. It could be a single, exercise device, whatever. So the difference is basically the loading, and the loading is a flywheel instead of a weight. And the weight is, like you said, based on gravity. So more weight, would always be the same, right? So 100 pounds is 100 pounds. It doesn't really know if you lifted it up or if it's on the floor, it's still 100 pounds, right? If you move it fast, it's still 100 pounds. If it's standing still, it's like 100 pounds. Uh, flywheel flywheel device is with inertia. So usually most devices have like a strap or a band or something around the shaft, and then the flywheel is put on the shaft. So it's basically like a yo-yo. You pull it out, and when you run out of the strap, the harder you have pulled, the more energy you will have put into the flywheel, and it will sort of pull you back with the same amount of energy that you put into the system, minus the friction. And the flywheel resists. So basically, things don't want to move. So if you want to accelerate the car, you need to press the gas, right? And if you want to brake it, you also need to put in energy to brake the car or decelerate the car. And same with the flywheel. So if you want to change direction on something or change it, it has a constant speed. So this is back to like old Newton laws, like if it's like a second law or third law, whatever. So basically, to change the direction or velocity of an object, you need to input force into it. So basically, here to accelerate the flywheel, you need to input a force, and the flywheel doesn't want to be moved. So the harder you pull, the more it will resist, basically. So as long as you try to accelerate the flywheel, it will resist you. So if you move at constant speed, you don't really have any load, but as long as you try to accelerate, it will sort of provide resistance. And then you can have more flywheels on that will have more inertia. So at a given force, it will basically just move slower. With the small flywheels, small inertia, with a given force, you will move faster. So inertia is basically a way to dictate sort of the speed of the movement. And then the intensity is still based on how much the intensity you put into the flywheel. So you can load up with a lot of flywheel and still not going very hard, which is quite different from weights, because everything is like how much I put on a bar.
Right.
You can't lift like a 300 kilo deadlift. It's like, yeah, I'm just go super slow, so then I'll manage, because it won't move. And with flywheel, you can put on tons of flywheel and then just go, and it will start moving, but you will move super slow. But you can actually go fairly easy with all that load. So I usually compare with like moving in water. So if you're at the beach and you go out to like your ankles, for example, the water is providing some resistance, right? But only if you move. So, and the faster you try to move, the more the resistance will be. And then, so I can go up to like to my neck. If I stand still, the water is not doing any resistance on me, right? So it's not load. But if I try to move, especially if I try to move faster, it's going to be more of a resistance towards me. So that's basically the same. So we have a little bit more, like I'd say slightly more factors, because we have the inertia, but then also the intensity.
I like that. That's a good analogy. I never thought about it like that. It's so true. So a follow up question on that. You mentioned just the basic concept of how the flywheels work. So is there? Let's talk about like the difference of the two ends of the spectrum. So you could have a smaller amount of flywheels on, or a small flywheel, just singular, and you can move it really fast and get a really fast return on the eccentric. Or you could load up with some heavier flywheels and maybe not move it as fast, but you still get a lot of force coming down on the eccentric, but may not be at such a high speed as it will be with like a smaller medium flywheel. Can you talk about kind of the range of that and maybe some of the benefits, pros and cons of each of those types of setups?
Yeah, so with those two, that's two extremes, right? So
Yeah.
you will move across the force velocity spectrum. So I think it comes down to like what am I doing and for what, right? What am I trying to train? So you select your exercise and your load and your intensity based on what you want to achieve. So these are two extremes. And I would say the range is basically unlimited in terms of, in terms of physics, right? But it comes down to like the manufacturer of that device, like what is the smallest flywheels they provide, and what's the biggest, how many can you fit, etc. So depends a little bit. So we try to keep a really big range on our devices just to provide for all those like end range and everything in between. So basically, when you're moving really fast, so you're so with that low inertia option, I see it quite a bit, and actually, I think it's a little bit overused. In general, when I see people, I, I, I usually see them using maybe a slightly, too low inertia, in my opinion. And I would say that a lot of people would probably benefit from going a little bit with a little bit higher inertia in general. But that's the same with weights. If you let people out in the gym that aren't like, don't have a coach there, or like super engaged in their sport or whatever, like super focused, like normal people, even if they have like fitness ambitions or like want to be stronger, if you let them select load, they will always pick way too little
Right.
load. So and it's also like we don't really know how hard we can push. So that's where the coach come in. So usually I would say like go with a little bit more inertia. So, but that obviously first thing would be like a power setting. So I'm moving fast and producing, force, but with high velocity, and like you said, a quick return. But the amount of energy in the flywheel will be very small, because the time for me to put and accelerate the flywheel will be so short, right? Because the concentric action will be fast and will be over, and then I'll be pulling back. So, and that's what you're feeling with more inertia. You have much more time to input. So whatever, if you, for example, double the inertia, let's say you basically with the same intensity, you cut the velocity to half, which means that the range of motion will be twice the amount of time, right, for you to complete the concentric action. But also, since your force producing capabilities goes up when you're allowed to move slower, so you're also able to produce more force.
Gotcha.
So basically, the amount of energy maybe quadruples. So there's way more force. So going up with inertia, allows you to produce more force, and then you will have much more energy in and out of the system, and more to play around with. Uh, so for example, for overload training, there are different methods for that. Maybe we're going to discuss that specifically, but I think usually a good method is to maybe use other muscles than your primary muscles. For example, in a squat, you can use your arms on the way up. So you use your arms to get more speed into the flywheel, more energy into the system, right? Using arms on the way up, and then I absorb just only using my legs on the way down to get a really nice intense overload, because I have a combination of a little bit longer time under tension on the way down, because there's a lot of energy into the system, and I will have to struggle for some time to really decelerate it, absorb it all, and then go back up. With the super small flywheel, I will be moving fast, so I have a fast eccentric, that is good, but I will be able to absorb it so fast, so I will basically just work at a single, like, one point and then go up again. So it depends a little bit what you're training for. But for example, if you want to be stronger in the deep portion of the squat, for example, it's a range you want to be stronger in. So then you probably want to have a little bit more of time for that struggle, for that shift from eccentric to concentric. So
Gotcha.
I would use more inertia.
No, I like that. And when you mentioned the overload, kind of using assistance on the concentric, whether it be arms or something like that. Something I like to do is I'll attach like a handle to the harness, or whatever the athlete's using, and I'll assist them. Like I'll just basically pull them up
Mm.
a little bit, and then I'll
Yeah.
let go, and so kind of helping them put more into that with my assistance, and then I let go, so they have to kind of absorb or mitigate all of that eccentric stress and energy on the way down. Um, One thing I wanted to ask you about, particularly, we'll just talk about the kBox because that's what I have and what I'm used to. Um, is there an art or a science to the amount of slack that should be or can be on the strap. So meaning, um, does it matter when that wheel reverses and pulls you down? Because I've seen and I've experimented with like some different things, kind of leaving more slack in there, so they actually have to time it, and like maybe I want them to catch it at the bottom. So, or traditionally, I'll take no slack in there. So for a squat example, they finish the squat at the top, extend knees and hips, and then that thing is starting to pull them down. So now they've got the whole eccentric load the entire time. Kind of a terrible question, but any thoughts on that?
No, but it's a good one. It's a good one, and we actually spend quite a bit on. I mean, we have our level one, we have a level 1, 2, and level 3 courses that we run at Exxentric, and we also have them online, at least level 1 and 2. So number 1 is user course, level 1, and then it becomes a trainer course, level 2, and then we call it like a master course. So the levels are basically level 1, get to understand and use the device. Number 2 is like, okay, how do I think about the load and different exercises and combinations, and then 3 is more of like a let's look at this over a season. I want to go somewhere, programming, and how does this work in a program. So a little bit like different view on training. And we actually discussed this it really in the first part, and also repeated in the second part. So the slack, for example, the squat. Yeah, there's a lot of factors here that comes into this, and it could be like, and it felt like you almost felt bad for asking, but I think it's a really good question, and I would say that's almost to some extent it is a little bit of an art, because it comes into also like the personal preference will be important, but also what you're trying to achieve. So, for example, like let's say changing between stuff, like say we're doing squats, let's say we're warming up with some medium inertia, and then we do a few heavy sets, and then we're gonna, when you're warm, we want to finish off with some really power squats, really super intense. You're doing the same exercise, but you're moving so much at different speeds. So in the last set with power, you're moving so much faster, which means with the same slack you would have a much shorter transition time in concentric eccentric.
Mm-hmm.
You may be moving like 3 times as fast. So you need more strap to get sort of equal amount of time in that full extension. So I see sometimes, quite often, where I see people like they can't really execute the exercise that you would like them to do because of the strap length. So it is important. So just keep in mind, I think, especially when people are going with lower inertia and high intensity, you sort of remove that transition. The transition time is much shorter, and in general, people don't forget that moving fast is so much more technical than moving slow. And that's why I always say, when you're bringing on athletes, you're letting the train or patients, whatever, when you're trying the kBox for the first time, or any flywheel device, add load, add flywheels. So with weights, we start with an empty bar, right? And it looks good. We start adding weights, maybe gradual over time, maybe weeks and months before we actually maybe load them in the back squat. But here's like load up from the start, which is a little bit maybe not so logical. But the logic here is like, I want this person to really move slow, so I can adjust them going right on the fly. It's like, move your feet a little bit, or like, stop the flywheel, or interact with them, and also explain what's happening, right? Okay, so now you're standing up, and then you feel you come to a stop, it's going to pull you down, absorb, that's much easier if it's going a little bit slower. And they also feel how the flywheel is actually pulling them down. So start a little bit heavier. I think that's good. So learn the exercise, like for example the squat, and there, because it could be really problems when they start really fast the first time, and especially when it comes to belt length, etc. So get them to understand exercise, so they also can feel the personal preference, see that they can fully extend, because I see a lot of squats, for example, that aren't fully extended, so they lose a lot of the hip extension, right? So they want to fully extend. If I make the strap too short, or they don't get that transition, a little bit of pause, maybe they don't go to a full extend, and then they're being pulled down. So I think that's important. So with the more experience, I let them go with a little bit longer, so they can really fully extend, and especially when you go into more like power actions, a little bit longer, a little bit more slack, absolutely. And then you mentioned like variations where you sort of explode up and maybe sit down. So you're moving faster than the flywheel on the way down and sort of let it hit you on the way down. So it's like, okay, at this angle, I want you to absorb almost like a hit, almost like a landing.
Mm-hmm.
And then you definitely need a little bit of extra slack so you can really like fully extend, sit down, and then get hit by the flywheel. But that's a fairly extreme overload, but really effective for those with the landings. I know a lot of Olympic snowboarders, for example, have
Yep.
really great results using that type of overload to mimic their landings.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's a very tough variation. I probably only gave that to like two or three of my athletes, and it's so much like you said, timing, rhythm, just a feel for not only the flywheel but like your own movement as well. Like you really have to be in tune with your body for me to say I want you to be at this angle and almost like waiting for the flywheel so when it hits you can just stop it and then we go. So speaking on strap length, like something that I've also toyed around with is um, overcoming isometrics. And so, basically using the flywheel, like not for inertia, but for something that's static and immovable to kind of have an athlete try to push through or bust through, which has been great because you can set that strap length, get the athlete at whatever angle that you want them at, whatever exercise, wherever the case may be. Are you seeing a lot of uses like that with the kBox, or is still more of like a flywheel inertia type exercise device?
I hope it's being used way more than we see, because it looks a little bit off on, I mean, what we see is social media, right? And what people want to show, like the cool stuff or the fun stuff. So we don't see the boring stuff. We don't see warm-ups, we don't see stretches, we don't see, there's a lot of good stuff that we don't see. So sometimes you get like, okay, this guy, he trains really extreme, because when he, whatever he see, I mean, he maybe do that type of braking action that you mentioned, like going up, sit down, get hit by the
Mm-hmm.
flywheel. Looks crazy, right? But that's maybe like a dose that he does like every, 2 times a month,
Right.
or whatever, at or a very specific pre-competition phase before going into the, like, you know Olympic skiing starts or whatever. So, and yeah, so I think isometrics is, I hope it's being used more, and I don't see it a lot. And I think it's a great tool. I mean, it's great in many ways. I mean, we have all types of professionals using our devices, and also all types of users. We see everything from kids, seniors, to athletes, to military, and all kinds of different, and for fitness enthusiasts, home users. And I think the isometrics are really good. Could be really good, like, for example, like post ACL. Usually they start loading, decent loading when it comes to, like, when an SNC coach would start calling strength training, is maybe around week 9, maybe week 10 or something, after surgery, right? And but you that patient's been walking, and walking in stairs and doing stuff, for many weeks, when it comes to that loading, when they start to load in the gym. So I'm thinking it's a window here where we could start to maybe load a little bit more, but doing it in a safe way. And I think those isometrics, working through a squat, for example, 3, 4, 5 different stops, working through the whole range to see, like, is there pain? Is there, are you able to produce and contract your muscles in your sort of injured leg?
Mm-hmm.
Um, is there any side difference? And build some confidence, and use those muscles, and like user control, because the user decides how hard they're going to push, right? So it's really safe and user controlled. So I think it's a really good way. It's also a good way to sort of let somebody understand, with the kBox, like for seniors, for example. You could start with isometrics, and let's say that you want them to increase their squat strength, so you can get it good for them walking, getting up of the chair, out of the bed, right? So squat is a good exercise. You get them the harness on, you put on a flywheel, you can talk to them, and then you take them down a couple of inches, maybe sort of almost fully extended. They push a little bit, you can let them out, pull them back a little bit deeper, and you can go through the range of motion, and you can do that for a couple of times. They will get stronger from that, and since it spills over. So it's not just exactly that angle, right? So it's maybe 15 degrees, around that point. So if you go through the range of motion with, 4 or 5 stops, you will basically work the whole range of motion. They will get a little bit stronger. And then when the day comes when you want to do it dynamically, they know everything.
Mhm.
They know how to put on their harness, to how to connect themselves to the device. They're familiar with the flywheel and everything. They're just going to do it dynamically. So I think it could be a great tool to learn the kBox in a super safe way as well. Um, so that's just a few examples. And I also see, like, for sport specific stuff, like we mentioned, being able to work at specific angles. For a lot of sports are very specific in specific angles, like landings in snowboard, that one we mentioned. There's some jumpers as well, and there's a lot of, really specific angles. And to be able to pinpoint those, where we can take, like, the training volume and, like, really focus on, like, okay, this portion. Myself, I'm a power lifter, competitive, like, master athlete. So I mean, it's great to just work on my sticking point in the squat.
Mm.
And I can do a normal training session where I'm really tired or whatever, but then I can add maybe 5 times 3 seconds around my sticking point, just there. No, not carrying, not need to unrack any weights or do any complicated setups or spotters or whatever. I just set the height and I just go, like, maximal push for 3 seconds. I do it 5 times. Takes me about 5-10 minutes extra, and I get the dose exactly where I need it. So I think it's also a really good tool to really pinpoint and maybe keep the overall training volume even lower, because you're able to focus it on exactly what you want to get out of the gym. Like, I want to be stronger at this angle. So, and me carrying that weight up and down, racking it, and putting fatigue on my back and knees and everything, just because I just really need it. It's a couple of degrees down here that I need to get, and maybe I need to get another 5-10 pounds here, weight, to be stronger, to do a PB in the next competition. So, and if I can get rid of some of that, I have actually a pretty good example of that, of an elite athlete. We had a Swedish weightlifter that he was, when he was studying at the university, trained 2 times a day, 6 days a week, and then he had trained, I think, once on Sunday. So I think he had 13 sessions per week, and he was like the Swedish champion and Nordic champion a couple of years in a row. And then another guy came in, took his title the last year he was in school, and then he finished, graduated, and he had to start working. And he realized he got a job where he could still train quite a bit. They were very flexible, but still he realized, like, I can only go to gym like once a day now. So it's like Monday to Saturday, so 6 times a week. So he saw like half of his training volume just disappear. So we said, like, okay, so he wanted to look into the kBox and how he could use it at home to add training volume and what he should do. So we actually picked it, and he focused on doing some of the quality stuff on the kBox, like overload and working the different angles. So he got another 3 evening sessions or morning sessions at home. So instead of 6, he had 9, but still from 13 down to 9. But that focus, but still he improved his numbers. He regained his national title and won the Nordics again, I think, but definitely the Swedish title at least. So he felt like, yeah, he could move forward from there, when he sort of like, oh, if I'm second now and I have to start working and, all these sessions disappear, I'm never going to come back. So, but I think it's not always about adding like volume, but, being more specific. And I think isometrics is a really good, because it creates very little fatigue as well. It's very friendly in that sense. Also, it's like very low risk of injury, and you can really target those weak spots. So I think that's a really, a tool that we should use more, and I hope that people use it
Yeah,
more.
I got a little quick story kind of about the ISOs as well. I bought just a crane scale, you know what I mean, and hooked it up to the
Mm.
kBox, and we would do basically I would have the crane scale hooked to the kBox and then hooked to a neutral grip handle. And I was having guys do like the bottom of a deadlift, kind of like the same angles as a trap bar deadlift. So one of
Mm.
our biggest, like I would say, lifting KPIs that we use is a trap bar jump. So we like to load them up pretty heavy because a lot of us a lot of the athletes I work with, basketball players, like we want Olympic lift with them just because the amount of time we have with them in the off season, and then their unique body, you know, the lever angles and everything. Like arms are crazy long, wrists are the money makers. So we use a trap bar jump, and so I was noticing like we're getting, you know, guys in the mid 200s trap bar jumping for maybe 3 to 4 reps around like 1.25 to 1.4 meters per second average. And I was trying to get them to about 1.0 average, but a lot of them were kind of timid to add weight because it's like, oh, man, I'm like jumping with a lot of weight. So we started using ISO pulls on the kBox with that crane scale, and I was able to see the readout of the amount of kind of the pounds that they were putting into that pull, and we're getting like 370, 400 pounds of force during that ISO pull across like 5 to 7 seconds. So one, it was a good potentiation tool to go then into their jumps, and then they feel like really stable and strong. But then two, I was able to say, look, dude, you just pulled 400 pounds on this isometric pull, and you're jumping with 250. I think based on the VBT readouts and what I just saw, your isometric pull, that we can add weight if you feel comfortable and your form is locked in. So my guys are like, yeah, let's try it. So then we had guys that are 170, 180 pound athletes jumping with 315 pounds on a trap bar jump, still getting it about 1.0 to like 1.1 meter per second on an average readout. So it helped me kind of in multiple ways to be able to use the flywheel, not necessarily for like the flywheel training, but for the isometric aspect of it too, which, like you said, can be such an untapped potential in training because I just don't think a lot of people are using it like creatively like that.
Yeah. And with weights, isometrics are, I mean, with weights, they're kind of not very practical to use it with weights. I mean, you need to load it up super heavy so it can't move or, fix. And then you're working with a group of athletes, different heights and etc. And, up and down. And it's like, yeah, it's complicated. So, but there are a lot of, simple tools like with just non-elastic bands or whatever to put yourself in a position, or like a flywheel, for example, where you can just change the height from rep to rep and actually adjust them while you see like, oh, it's a little bit too high because maybe he pulls a little slack out of the
Mm-hmm.
system, so he has a good angle. He starts pushing and he moves like a couple of inches, it's like, oh, he's a little bit too high. You can just pull him down to the position where you want because you have such a long lever, so you can adjust him actually on the fly during the contraction as well, which is also super. Was it mentally? I do that myself. Like if you're pushing everything you have up on this like isometric pull, and your spotter is basically slowly pulling you down, so it's like the super slow eccentric.
Mm.
It's frustrating because you're helpless. You
Yeah.
see, he's having like 1-2 hands, and he's smiling, and he's just pulling you down. And I'm pushing everything I got with my squats. It's like mind
Yeah.
blowing.
I love that, man.
Yeah.
Um, question about some of the other products. I have a lot of experience with the kBox, but I know you guys have other products as well. Can you talk a little bit about some of the other creative ways that people are using flywheels and some of the products that you guys have? Because I mean, the kBox has changed my program. Like it's a major part of what I do now, and like guys and my ladies have like they love it, but they hate it at the same time. And so
Yeah.
I know they're I'm eyeing some of the pulleys that you guys have. I know you guys have a leg extension machine. Like talk a little bit about kind of like how you're expanding Exxentric and the whole flywheel space.
Yeah, so we started with kBox in 2011, and then actually the first thing that happened was that we had different models. So it's like one bigger, one smaller, and then one lighter, and so now we have three models. And during that time, we also saw like people buying our kBoxes and putting them on the wall. They mounted it on the wall and start doing like rows and rotations and all that stuff because they love the resistance. We felt like, yeah, it's a waste of money basically, and also space to put this like big platform on your wall. It doesn't look very nice, and it's like this fixed height, so you can't really move it. So obviously we need to build something that allows people to sort of train and use different angles and use it in that direction as well. So that became the start of the K pulley. So the first K pulley that we call now is K pulley 2. Is the version that we're selling now. Is basically a beam and there's a flywheel device at the bottom, and then you have you can adjust the height. So similar to like weight stack devices that you have in the gym. So you could go from up to down, or down to up, or straight out, or whatever. And then we sort of the newest device in that family is the K pulley Go, which is like one device that you move the device instead, so you can mount it where you want it. So a little bit because you don't have the beam, you can mount it to a beam if you want to, but you can also bring the device with you and put it on like on a fence or a post or something that you have, or a column or whatever. So it's a little bit more for mobility and maybe training like on the pitch or when you travel. So a little bit adjusted for that. But can also be mounted to beams and racks, and more and more people are actually mounting them to their existing squat racks. We have built some attachments for some of the most common racks now, so you can mount it. It's getting more and more popular as well. And then the single X devices came through. So we basically came back to where everything started, right? So we started with multi-exercise thinking, and we felt like, yeah, but leg extension is still fairly, I think to me, it's a very useful device because in some cases, you really want to work the quads. It could be for bodybuilding, or it could be for injury. I mean, squats is not a good exercise to train your quads if you, for example, had an ACL injury, because there might be like, you might load the healthy leg a little bit more, etc. So the nervous system and your body is also trying to play tricks on you a little bit. So be able to focus on the quads can be really good. When even if you're in a sport, I mean, there are preparation phases where you might want to put on strength and mass, and the quads is one of those key muscles. So I think there's and that's why also probably in a lot of gyms, even if they don't have a lot of devices, they will probably have a leg extension device there somewhere. So we wanted to build that, and also build like the best one, of course. We could see, I mean, one big benefit with flywheel devices is that we don't have that huge big weight stack, and we also try to build our device a little bit smaller as well, and getting rid of the weight stack obviously, but then also like make it like movable. So it's around like 220 pounds or something. It has wheels, so you can roll it around. So it's like you can be in the gym and you can move it into another hall. If you want to do like a circuit session or whatever, you can roll it back out. And it also accommodate for like smaller clinics, where you can actually like bring it out when you need it, and maybe put it against the wall when you don't use it, to sort of make use of your floor space, which you really can't do with the normal one that is fairly heavy. And then we sort of, the last one we did was the leg flex, obviously for the hamstrings. What some studies coming out was a study showing that in a seated versus a prone, they had like roughly 50% more hypertrophy in the seated version, because you work at longer muscle length. And we also felt like going to like with the injuries, where injuries happen, etc. It's at with the flexed hip, you have a much longer muscle length. So it felt like, yeah, we probably have a more benefit. It's still not like, it's, I mean, obviously not the only exercise you can do. There's a lot of other training, both in the gym and also injury prevention. But I felt like, yeah, if we have a leg curl device, why not work at longer lengths? Would probably be better for those athletes as well. So, and also for just like practical reasons, I think a lot of people, include myself, I don't really enjoy lying flat like a fat seal, with my ass up in the air and sweaty
Yeah.
and doing my leg curls, whatever. Device is also much bigger, right? So, and I think it's easy to start tweaking your lower back, etc., and working a little bit. So I actually enjoyed the seated. So, and with that scientific evidence we saw, it's like, yeah, let's make a seated version as well. We can get the Flywheel seated version. It's super compact. You can actually look your client in the eyes instead of looking at their butt, and we work at longer muscle lengths. And and I think it's a really nice tool to build strength, to add to your posterior strength,
Yeah.
together with other exercises as well. So, and that's basically the range. So those two single X devices, two kind of pulleys, and three kind of kBoxes.
That's awesome. Nah, I'm in a group chat with some other coaches, and one of them we bonded. The reason why we met is because we would both do Nordic hamstring curls with our athletes, but when we would post it, we would say something like, don't look down or always look to the side or something like that, because it's like you don't. As a trainer, you're sitting there holding ankles, and like you're like, where do I look? Where do I? You don't want to look straight down, especially if it's like a kid or something like that. So we would always post, Nordics on the Instagram story or something like that, and hashtag don't look down or hashtag look away. So yeah, I love the feeling of a seated leg curl. I like the feeling of kind of being extended and then having to pull down with the flex tip and kind of pull that heel into my body rather than the opposite way, which I both is fine, but it's just like for me, comfort level is just it just feels better. And I think like athletes are more intuitive now and they kind of know like what their body likes and what feels better. So to have that on your product line is pretty cool, man. So um, I want to go a little bit back, taking a step back into the training world and talk about kind of my population, and that's the basketball world. So basketball players are so unique. A lot of them have just odd body shapes. We got super tall guys, lanky limbs. A lot of them are not necessarily like the best lifters, or because it's such a specialized sport at an early age, a lot of them aren't the best movers either. Some of the best basketball players I've ever worked with are some of the best players in the world and have terrible technique in lifting or just general coordination. So some of the reasons why I think the kBox works well with this population is because of its unique just approach to training. It's inertia versus gravity. It's a lot of harnesses and handles versus barbells and dumbbells. Can you talk a little bit about maybe some things that you've seen in the basketball space, any maybe research or just best use cases that you've seen with the flywheel training on this unique population?
Yeah, and actually, I bring up basketball. I've never worked with basketball players myself in that aspect, and but talk to a lot of coaches working in basket and sort of similar sports as well. And in like yeah, if basketball players love the gym, they probably be maybe in another sport. I guess a lot of them maybe playing football or something else, right? And they like to play with the ball and they like the sport, but they don't really love the gym, and that's maybe one part of them ending up being basketball players, I guess. And like you said, there's like super awkward like length and angles and whatnot. So even with a really good squat technique, for example, there's a huge lever, and that like load on the the back squat load will put a lot of torque on that lower back. Maybe it could be perfect like high bar squats, whatever, but still it's going to be messy, and they're going to be have fatigue in the back and maybe injuries. And from what I hear from a lot of coaches and like on working in for example, we have a lot of customers in the NBA. I think about 16 teams are using our products in the NBA. So talking to these coaches, they're saying like, yeah, a lot of them have a history, like they had back pain or injuries from like high school and playing and growing up. So they have sort of like, yeah, they really don't want to put, a lot of load on their back. because of that history. And what they say is like, yeah, they're much more confident because on the flywheel training, it's not like this huge, like, it's not that bar with all those weights under, so much less intimidating. It's much more focused on like what they actually do. And they say like, yeah, when we put them under a bar, they sort of, they go easier, right? They go with less weight because they're a little bit intimidated. But when we put it on the kBox, we can see them in their face. They're just going, they're pushing themselves so much harder. And I think that is also an important factor. And going back to youth, when we have this, when they were kids, maybe age like 13, 14, 15, like different sizes. Some are more mature and some aren't, like they like biologically a little bit different. It's also a nice advantage because they can work out on the same tool, maybe with the same flywheel. You don't have to be like, oh, I'm the weakest kid in the squad, he's the strongest guy, look at all the weights he's putting on the bar, etc. It's like, yeah, we're working together, we're all pushing 100%, we focus on technique. You as a coach give instructions like, yeah, go a little bit harder, that's good, focus on this, think about, mind your knees, like where are you looking, whatever. You can focus on the execution and give them technical feedback and push them. And you don't have to be that super obvious, like who's the strongest. So it works all, I'd say, from starting and even up to like the NBA, in this case, athletes. So, and I think that's a benefit, big benefit. I mean, if we get them to push them, if they push harder, I'm super happy. Just to hear a coach saying that, then I'm super happy. I mean, so like, that's great, and hopefully he gets good results from that as well. But I mean, just having it and that they can see that they're pushing themselves harder, that's a big win for us, I think. Yeah.
Sorry to cut you off. I was going to say a big thing that the kBox has done for my program is kind of what you're alluding to there is, you can kind of see the difference. Like they actually like the exercise that they're doing, and it's the same movement pattern that they might have been doing anyway. It's a single leg squat, like a split squat, or it's a bilateral squat, or a hinge, or anything like that. But you can see the difference because like they realize, like the old saying, like you get out what you put in, right? Normally we say that about like business or getting better at a sport or something, but in this case, it's like you get out what you put in terms of the flywheel. And so they can feel that. And then the other athletes can also see it. So if somebody's like on the flywheel doing a squat and they're kind of like going soft, somebody will say like, no, you got to push harder than that. Like it's not even pulling you down. Or we can have the K meter set up with the iPad and they can actually see like the graph, the bar graph, every rep, and make those mid set kind of alterations to their form based on whatever the case may be. So I guess a follow-up question would be about the K meter and just in general, like the sports science aspect, or the tech training aspect of the kBox and all the different flywheel devices that you guys make. How have you seen a shift in some of the way that people are using it after the introduction of the K meter?
Yeah, I think we fit. I think it fit quite well into like a general trend. When I was an athlete myself, or when I was a young coach, it was a lot about like we did testing, right? So we did testing in the. I mean, ice hockey. We did like when the off season started, we did a test, and then there was summer, and then we did test again, and then maybe on a higher level you did some test in the middle of the season as well to see how we managed to maintain. And I think the whole now we're basically, most of the things we're doing is more about monitoring, right? So I think that in kBox and the K meter fits really well into that. It's like, yeah, we measure in training, so we see we have a goal and we know that this will, I need to build these numbers in these exercises is the focus for me, and I can monitor it like session by session, or at least in those sessions that are maybe maximal or power sessions or whatever that can monitor. So maybe not monitor every single repetition, but certain sessions like all through the season, and so I think the K meter works pretty well in that aspect. That you also give, gives a lot of accountability. I also think it's good because it gives you, as a coach, you get a tool to like talk about like why are we training? Like It's like, because from weights, and we know, like, if they squat 200 kilos, probably won't, be a better, jumper, maybe for getting to like 220 kilos, in his back squats. But if you can improve his power with 10%, that would make a difference, right? So I think the K meters can open up, like, yeah, you could talk about intensity, you can talk about inertia, you can explain to people how things, and they could see how numbers change. If you add flywheels, the power will go down because you're forcing them to move slower, but you're also producing more force. You can see, okay, force metrics goes up, power goes down. So now we're building this. Now I want you to become stronger. So I want you to push. And that's why I'm adding flywheels. And then we're going to do this for like a number of weeks, and then we're going to come into another period. We're going to transition to lighter loads and be more explosive. And then I want this number to go up. And in the end, I want you to end, like, in 2-3 months, I want you to be at 16 watts per kilo body weight or whatever. Like, and then I know that you will be jumping higher. So I think it's a good tool that can also be used to, like, to get, because if they understand it and how you train and why they do stuff, builds like accountability, and they can understand the training. And at least my philosophy as a coach was to be like, yeah, I want to make myself sort of not being necessary. Sort of, if I teach them, if I educate them, if they understand what I do, I can sort of step out, and they're still doing, because they know what they're doing and they know why they're doing it, and they know how to do it, right? So they don't really need me because I taught them that. So, and yeah, and I think the K-Meet could be a good tool for that. So it provides different metrics like power output, peak power, average power, force, some average velocity, peak velocity, average velocity. My favorite metric is the watts per kilos, because I think it's the peak power. So concentric peak power divided by body weight. So, for example, the squat is a really good predictor, and we had teams they've been looking at that metric, and they also did testing. Elite handball. So handball is not super big in the US, but it's fairly big in Sweden and some European countries. But it's a very physical sport. I would say that we don't really have rugby or American football, as we call it, your football. But I would say that this is the closest that you can come to that in terms of like training mentality. They're really physical, big guys, jumping, sprinting. It's very physical sport as well, with a lot of like, it's not a contact sport really, but it actually is. So if you see it, it's fairly like, they push. It's really because you want to, this offense, defense, back and forth. So quick pace. So they're really good athletes. They're strong. They're great endurance. They're sprinting. They're jumping, and also like playing a sport with a lot of technical skills at the same time, right? So, and so they did sprint testing and jump testing like every month, all through the season after season. So that one of these coaches in one of our elite teams, he had really good data on this, and then he started implementing kBox. And then after a while, he realized, like, because when we put the numbers together, so like the watts per kilo is actually correlation basically 1-to-1 with your jump test. So I can skip the jump test. We don't need to do the jump test. I know from the training sessions how he's going to jump if I test him next week. So I don't really. So they actually completely moved that out. They also had really good correlation with the sprints, with the short sprints as well. But they could also see a little bit difference with the bigger players and smaller players. How they started was not really 1-to-1 as with jumping, but with jumping. And yeah, it makes sense. Like, we look at power output, right? And we have your body weight. It's the same with the jump. If you're lighter, same power, you will jump higher, higher power, same body weight, you will also jump higher. So that's what we measure on the kBox, power output and your body weight. So that's a really good metric for that. But I also like it because it becomes, power is also difficult to explain to people. They understand weight on a bar, and 200 kilos is twice as much as 100 kilos, etc. They can look in a world record deadlift is this. They can sort of put it on the bar and understand it, like, oh, that's super heavy, etc. So it's people can relate to it. When it comes to power, it's a little bit difficult, because like I said, I put on more flywheel. I need your repetitions take twice as long. You're being pulled down much more energy into the system, but then you see your power output drops, and it's like, yeah, but I worked longer, harder for a longer time, and I'm more tired, but how could my power output go down? Yeah, because you move slower, and it's like force times velocity, and velocity dropped more than whatever. So yeah, power output went down, and then we have these watts. So it's a little bit difficult for people to understand power in general. And then also the numbers becomes like 2,000 watts, 3,000 watts, and people can't really relate to that. Okay, what is that? We're starting to think about our dishwasher, or
Right.
my power tool,
Yeah.
whatever. It's like, yeah, but how does my power tool relate to my squat? So at least what I like with the watts per kilo is like, okay, this is power output. You just have to accept that that's the power, and then your body weight. So, and it ends up being like 10, 15, 20, maybe 25, maybe 30 if you're super powerful, like if we're talking about the squat, right? And so it's like, okay, you're at 15. At 17, I know that you will jump high enough or whatever. That's a good, based on what I know, but my previous athletes, or on the team, like the average, like, yeah, if we can move this, like, okay, it's like, okay, I'm going to get this number from 15 to 17. I can do that. It's like, it's fairly easy, and I think they can understand it and relate to it a little bit better. So that's why I like it, instead of like, oh, 2,000 watts, what's that? So yeah, so that's how I would use kmeter.
No, I'm glad you brought that up because I actually was not using that metric and like didn't really know how to use it. But now that you've explained it and kind of, you know, gave some of your examples, like it makes perfect sense. And especially because it is I guess an individualized number. It's kind of per kilo, you know what I mean? Or for me, it's like per pound.
Mm,
So watts per whatever you weigh, that's a relative strength or excuse me, relative power production metric. So it's almost where it's like it takes kind of the comparisons out, like, oh, how much does he do or how much does she do? It's more about you. And if you can get more relatively strong or relatively powerful, I think that will be good for you as an athlete instead of worrying about what the next person is doing. Because at the end of the day, if you're on the court in basketball with 9 other people, um, there's different positions for a reason. You know what I mean? Like not everybody is going to have to be held to the same standard. So if you're a point guard and primarily your job is to defend the other point guard, it's kind of like you guys are the same shape, frame, height, weight, kind of similar build. Whoever has better watts per kilo is probably, if there's a loose ball, they might be the one to get that. Or if it's a jump ball and you're a center, whoever has the higher watts per kilo is probably going to get that because it's relative to your body weight. And so that's another reason why I like individualized metrics and things like RSI, things like load velocity curves for our sprinting has been so helpful for us to kind of get the athlete what they need, like specifically for them, not guessing and kind of like take a shot in the dark and saying, I think this will work. And on that same note, one of the biggest correlations, like you were talking about, jumping being correlated to the watts per kilo, I've noticed a huge correlation between the just general performance on the kBox, because I can't say watts per kilo, but general performance on the kBox to an athlete's 10-meter acceleration, because that's kind of like when we use it. Like we'll use the kBox the most in our first phase of off season. We're kind of working on eccentric and isometric strength, and our speed work at the time is more acceleration driven. So we're really having stiff feet on the ground, like pushing hard, getting those ranges of motion, those angles. I've noticed like my athletes that do I would say the best on the kBox have the best improvements in their acceleration in 10 meters. And we're tracking that with the 1080 sprint. So it's like to be able to look at the performance on a kBox and kmeter and look at the 1080 sprint and see like, this athlete is putting out crazy eccentric numbers and their acceleration is getting better, that's like connecting the dots for me, similar to what that story was. So just want to throw that out there because I think, with basketball being such an acceleration driven sport, acceleration, deceleration, the amount of eccentric and isometric strength you need to perform those actions is like through the roof. So I always like to throw my personal anecdotes in there.
Yeah, and just a comment on sprinting. I don't see tons of people doing that, but something I would recommend, and I would definitely try and do if I work with like any like field based sport with some sprinting. I would probably use a lot of these exercises also with the floating heel.
Mm-hmm.
Both in like the staggered stance, like a sprint start squat when they lean forward against the wall and they push them off, and also maybe in the regular squat. Could probably also be done in the lateral squat if you're using for cutting, etc. I see a lot of sprinters do that when they are using the kBox. I don't see it as often when I see this like other team sport athletes doing it. But since you brought up sprinting, etc. I think that's also, and I think that's also like fairly maybe a little bit difficult to load with traditional weights, like racking out, getting up on this elevation or whatever. So, and here you can, switch positions and have a staggered stance, super simple. If you want to move, like you don't really even need to move straight up. You can move, lean towards the wall and push because the resistance is in the band, right? And it can move, so you can go, laterally or forward or even backwards, depending on the setup on the kBox. That also allows for these like more sport specific actions you want to, you know, uh, you know, yeah, like a sprint start, for example. So yeah, so I see some of sprinters. We actually had one actual sprinter working at the company as well. I see a lot of his training using floating heels in most of the stuff, and also I mean for these all and for jumper as well to build that tendon stiffness.
Mm-hmm.
Is probably good for them, even if they're not sprinting, they're jumping. So that will force them to put a lot of more, force on the tendons. I know for me, being a power lifter, I could probably, I'm not using my calves and tendons that
Right.
much, but yeah, and then my jumping is pretty poor as well. So floating heels, I think it's something that you could, yeah, definitely becomes easier. I think using the
Yeah,
kBox.
I mean, probably my favorite exercise on the kBox, other than like the main staples, is a soleus raise, a seated calf raise, basically, where
Mm.
you just sit on the side of the kBox and we use a straight bar to put across your lap, right, right over your knees, and you're using basically the kBox to put your forefoot on, so you calf raise against it and then let it pull you down, and your heels are in space, so you have to activate them to not get pulled down too far and then push back up. So not necessarily a floating heel, but still like a lower leg exercise that's been huge for us, for our jumpers and I mean, basketball players in general, like accelerating, being able to have that ankle stiffness, and then like the injury mitigation piece of it too, like loading up the Achilles and lower the calf system in general, just giving it the robustness because they're making so many cuts and plants and pushing behind their frame and just trying to protect them against anything that could happen to the calf or Achilles complex. Like me, personally, like me, that's my biggest fear. Like as I still play regularly, and I'm 33, so I'm still young, but it's like, dude, if I blew my Achilles out, like I would be, that's my biggest fear in life. So like personally, I overly train for that. So I do want to ask you a couple quick questions before we get into kind of our final round, and that's just you know kind of open up the floor for you to talk a little bit about Exxentric, your company. I want you to be able to talk about like to promote your products and the things that you guys are doing. So just wanted to give you the platform to speak on that, some of the cool projects you guys have going on, and what to expect in 2023.
Oh yeah, I mean, to me, honestly, I'm kind of happy just to be able to talk about the concept. I mean, we're trying to provide a premium product, and we try to listen a lot to our customers. So a lot of a lot of the development we talked about, making more K boxes, making a K pulley, making single legs. It's like driven from like communication with customers, and see like, yeah, this thing wears down, or if it could be bigger, I could do this with these athletes, or I wouldn't to be able to do this. And I mean, we added accessories, and we added like we added this steel bar for some of, we have some super strong power lifters and strongman using it, so like we made a stiffer bar. We so to us it's like, yeah, it's up to us to provide the best. If people get interested in flywheel training, and there's solid evidence that flywheel training is good, people will go to flywheel training, and then we just have to provide the best tools, right? And listen to our customers and try to take it from there and improve gradually, and then we're fine. So I don't really feel like I need to or want to push my products per se in that sense. But I mean, we try to support research as much as possible. I've been asked to take part in some studies, but we always like said no. So I don't want my name on any papers or whatever. But as a company, we're happy to provide with equipment for good research teams that have solid track record and a well-founded idea. Like, yeah, we want to test this in this setting, or we want to look into how, for example, flywheel training could compare against this, or if it could solve this problem. And sometimes we discuss the protocols with them, because we obviously have fairly good insight into how the training protocols works. And also there's a gap between researchers and the practitioners, and we talk to a lot of practitioners, and then the researchers comes like, yeah, we want to look into hamstring injuries and we want to do this. It's like, yeah, but the coaches aren't doing that, just so you know. They are doing this. It's like, okay, so and that could sometimes change how they approach the project, or like how they include or what they compare against. So the study becomes a little bit, hopefully a little bit more valid to like what we coaches are actually doing. So we in that sense, we try to act as a platform. We have our products, and we can support them with giving them access to them, and they provide studies, so we know if this is good or bad, should we do it this way or that way, and that helps us to sort of talk to you and other coaches like, yeah, you should probably use it this way. um, so with that scientific support and people understanding the concept, I think that the last part is for us to provide good products, and yeah, that's our focus. And yeah, we are actually we are always working, and I think to a lot of our focus is going into like making our products better all the time. I think I counted, this was a pretty long time. We released the kBox 4, like the latest version. It was launched in 2016, so that's 6 years ago, and it's still called kBox 4. I know that I looked into, like, I think it was like 2019 or something, when I talked to my lead engineers, like, how many changes have we done to the kBox 4 since we launched it? And she actually came in after the launch. She's like, yeah, I don't really know, because you did some work before I came in, but since I came in, we have done about 200 changes.
Wow.
So that was basically like in 200 years. And it's like, and a lot of them are like super small, like this hole needs to be over here, and maybe we can do this, and maybe we could have a everything in the powder coating could maybe be another whatever. It's like to be a little bit more robust, or maybe you should have different thickness of the mat, whatever. It's stuff that you can't really see, but we see like, oh, we get some wear and tear here, and we change material. I mean, some changes are big, like K meter wasn't integrated from the start. Now it's like sort of more built in, and we changed to like basically everything is stainless now. So it wasn't earlier on. So we made a lot of changes that are big, but also a lot of these are small. And that's just a lot of our focus to see like what happens with the devices. And we also, that's the benefit of being like the biggest company, and also been in the business the longest, that we have a lot of users that have been using the products for like 10, 11 years. We can see what happens and where we need to improve, etc. So we spend a lot of time actually improving that, to make them better. But new products, I can't really, but we're working. I mean, we didn't have a real in-house tech department. We started up a tech department like a year ago. The two younger guys now, so we're starting to see some action there. So hopefully we'll be able to provide some cool stuff here when it comes to like measurement and sensors. And I don't know, but if I mean, we have a project that we call the Biodex Killer, for example. So we'll see what happens with that. Yeah, I hope they don't listen to this podcast. Well, we have some cool projects, and also like, and that we have a like everything from like machine learning project that we're starting next year to that we're testing for the app, sensor that I mentioned. We have a few different routes that we're investigating. We haven't really selected like the next biggest like physical product, but we're both discussion of like new versions of kBoxes and also a third single X device. So, and I think all that is we're discussing are good, that I sort of like in different ways. It's more about like maybe finding like a opportunity, like in terms of like, yeah, which segment needs this now, and what should be like the business sense of it as well to make it work. No, so yeah, it's the business aspect as well, and it's like now with the inflation, and I mean, first the pandemic and inflation and steel prices and transportation prices, it could be like, for example, single X now is like more material and also heavier to ship. So maybe right now it feels a little bit less attractive than maybe 3 years ago when shipping was lower. So it might that make, but I think all the products that we are discussing are cool products. So if the budget was unlimited and everything was, we could just go, I think I would probably start all of them. But we need to focus. It's more about like the timing and which do we start with and what do we do after that. But basically we're going to work in all the areas, like the sensor and the app side, the tech side, and also the product side, and also with accessories as well. So yeah, so hopefully, so the ultimate goal is basically, I mean, we're working on, I mean, you're a coach, you work with athletes, but for us, military is big for us. Fitness is also an important segment, like, yes, training for health or training for fitness, and then obviously the medical part as well. So, and all these different segments need slightly different things. So it's more like, yeah, we need to do something for our fitness segment now, and now we need to do something for a coach as well. So, and yeah, so hopefully we can do a little bit for everyone when it comes to Exxentric.
No, so a funny kind of follow up to that. I posted on my Instagram a couple days ago, and I said, "Hey, I'm gonna have the CEO of Exxentric on. You know, send me any Flywheel questions that you have, kBox, whatever." And I got a bunch of responses. Kind of most of it is what we talked about today, but one of the most common responses was people asking, how can I make my own flywheel, or what's the best bootleg flywheel, or how can I do flywheel training without having to buy one? And so I don't know if you remember, maybe like last year, strength and conditioning segment of Twitter was talking about, you know, how you can get a flywheel off of, you know, Amazon or whatever the case may be, and it's just as well as having a kBox or any of these other big brands. And you know, I know that you won't say it, so I'll say it. This is the reason why you buy a kBox, because of the level of detail that goes into making the products better. I mean, hundreds of changes into a product over the course of the year based on user feedback is exactly why you invest into premium products. And you know, hearing you say that, it just made me laugh, because I mean, I get it. You know, I understand wanting to save money or wanting to find a bargain or a deal, and I can't say that I've never done that, but it's just like it's you don't want to cut corners in training. You don't want to cut corners in terms of your athletes or your own personal health with the devices that you're using and implementing. And so, it just made me laugh, to hear you talk about some of the extensive changes and the process of what goes into making something that really is, a pretty simple product in terms of like how it's built and shaped and everything. It's like it takes that much detail and that much effort and that much refinement. Like just just invest. You know what I mean? Just invest in your program and your product instead of trying to find the replacement or the bootleg version. So I just want to throw that out there, man.
Yeah, yeah, I could probably talk for quite some time about. I mean, I mean, for us, I think I mean, it's good for the consumers. I mean, these sort of competitors, or even, I mean, there's some straight off copycats as well, right? But they, to some extent, they also keep us. I mean, we can't get lazy. We can't just say like, yeah, we're the biggest brand, we've been here since like blah blah blah, the original since blah blah blah. Whenever I see somebody, like, when their main sort of tagline or the main thing that they come with is like, yeah, we're the original, it's like, yeah, then you're probably not the best. If that's what you're pushing, if that's what
Right.
you're leading with, you're probably not the best. So it's like, yeah, we want to be that company, and these guys, I mean, they chase us, and if they can make something that is like almost as good as our, then we need to improve. So to some extent, that's good for us, it's good for the customers. But like you said, there's so much things, like when buying things, like, what can I get? Can I get education? Can I get some help? I mean, we have like two physios employed, we have one guy working with military, we had, a bunch of people with strength and conditioning accreditations. We have doctors, we have engineers, we have all kinds. Like, you want to talk to our lead engineer, you want to discuss product improvements, like, yeah, we can hook you up with her, or talk to our R&D team. I mean, we can do. I mean, we looked into do customizations, and we improve the. So we're open to that. And some of these, like you mentioned, like Amazon or buying from China or Alibaba, whatever. It's like, yeah, try to get hold of those. Or if you get the wrong color, if you're wrong product, or it doesn't work, or needs service, or whatever, warranties, whatever, and how is it built? Like, is it, who built this? Does the person that built it, do they have a salary they can live on? Do they have, vacation? I don't know. But I mean, for us, that's important. Like, we want to be this like sort of friendly, dedicated company. So actually, our core values are eager, friendly, and dedicated. So that's something we stress a lot with all people working. It's like, yeah, friendly. We see that's also why we call it Exxentric fam. Maybe you've seen that hashtag around. Like, yeah, we see like, yeah, our users are part of us, right? Because they provide feedback, they use our products, they get results, they might win games, or get back from an injury. So we are helping them, but they're also helping us, and it's important. Like, yeah, be friendly. Sometimes people can be upset or frustrated, or they have an issue with something, the product, or something they don't understand, or just I don't know, FedEx or whatever, something happened, right? And yeah, we want to be that friendly company that you can reach out to and ask questions and get feedback, and hopefully we can answer your questions. And dedicated, that we, like we said, like, we do product improvement, and we try to improve, and we listen. So when we get support emails and people say like, yeah, this happened, whatever, you can see my R&D team. When I go into the R&D team, I see that support email maybe on the weekend, and I follow up with the R&D team in that week. They already like, yeah, we scheduled a meeting, we're done, we called that customer, whatever. So they really like, we asked for these photos, and now we're looking. So they do changes, and they're really dedicated in improving this, and also eager, like, always want to move forward, always trying to improve. Like sort of like the, I think it comes from like the coaching aspect. For me, it doesn't really make sense to do anything. That's me personally, right? If I do something, I want to improve at it. I can be at a
Mhm.
really low level, but if I'm doing it, I want to do a little bit better next time than I did this time. And that's how we run the company. I think that's also like that's why it's one of our core values. We want to move forward, like new devices, new applications, find out, improve our things. And that's the company you're buying from. And there's other companies, of course, and I mean, you can build one yourself as well. I mean, the concept is not that complicated, but then it comes into like, I've seen a lot of, I mean, when it comes to DUI, I see tons of friction. Whatever I see when I see them on Instagram, I would say like, oh, that's a hell of a lot of friction.
Mm-hmm.
And people don't realize how much friction does for the eccentric component. Like just a few percentage of friction means like when you're in your concentric phase, 5% friction will mean 5% of the energy actually becomes heat and just disappears, right? So the friction sort of works against you on the way up. So it doesn't become energy into the flywheel. And then on the way down, the friction helps you because it helps you absorb that energy on the way down. So 5% friction doesn't maybe sound that much, but that's basically becomes 10% because you also helps you on the way down. So then you have a discrepancy, like the load in the eccentric phase is actually just 90% of the energy you put in. So, and you're being like 30% stronger, and we want to get an overload, you're way off from the start. It's
Yep.
like squatting. When people recommend using, I've seen recommending, for example, using a Smith machine for eccentric overload, which makes zero sense to me because the friction there sort of works against the whole concept. And the same, and some of these devices I see it's hardly any pullback, right? So it's like, why are you doing that? And removing even if you have a super tough concentric action, if you remove the eccentric component, we see that you get very little results from that strength training, even at concentric. And that's been, I mean, there's an old study from like 1991 where basically like they had one group doing concentric, eccentric, and one group did only concentric, so they didn't do the eccentric action. And since that group only got half the training volume, they had a third group doing double the amount of concentrics to equate for that volume. And they saw that the concentric only and the double concentric, they had the same improvement over that training period. Like very little happened. And the normal training group, concentric, eccentric, improved like this. So basically, it's like if you remove the eccentric component, you don't get any results from your concentric training, or very little results, very little gains in strength and mass. And even if you double up on the concentric actions, it really doesn't help. There's still like, it was like only waste of time. So there's a lot of studies showing this, how adding eccentric load can really boost your concentric strength. Because that's also quite common argument that I end up with, that people like, but my sport is like super concentric, so why should I do the eccentric actions? If you're swimming or cycling, it's like, but we don't do any eccentrics in our sport. Like, no, but you need to do it. If you want to be concentrically strong, you need to do eccentric. And especially the overload can really, make you gain strength in the concentric actions. So that's another topic we spend quite a bit of time on in our courses as well, to show that like the scientific foundation for that. But that so I lost my thread there a little bit, but
It's all good. No, man, that's awesome, man. I definitely have enjoyed this conversation, kind of learning more about Flywheels and learning about the company as well. So one thing we do on this show, we do the hot seat. So that's going to be just a bunch of random questions about really anything but training, just coming at you, and you can just go rapid fire answer. You can go as in depth as you want, or you can keep it as short as you want. It's just going to be some random stuff.
okay.
All right,
Fire
here we
away.
go. So first one, all right, you're on a flight. You're flying to America. All right, you're coming to Indianapolis, which is where I live. You get off the plane. What's the first fast food restaurant you're going to?
Well, if I had to do fast food, I'd probably end up with something. I honestly don't know. When I fly, I, um, I don't know, but I sort of gain weight, and my stomach, and I don't really feel good when flying. So, and I noticed that I like the less the less I eat during a flight, the better I feel. So usually I stick with water and I buy some fruit and maybe try to stay, and then usually like avoid fast food and that. So
Hmm.
that's a tricky question. Yeah, but if I met up with some friends, we went out, had some beers, and had some food. I mean, I guess pizza would be nice.
Gotcha.
So, yeah, um, something maybe pan pizza or something. We don't have it a lot here, so or usually I don't have it. So, yeah, I would go with some pan pizza and beer maybe.
Got you. Yeah, yeah, that sounds good. Um, all right, next question. Do you have any secret or hidden talents that a lot of people don't know about you?
Well, yeah, no, yeah, I don't really. I mean I do kind of a bit of like sewing at home. We call it sewing.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, because I sort of I didn't enjoy it. We had it in school as a subject. I didn't really enjoy it back then. Then I became when I was a doctor. I did a lot of like plastic surgery and dermatology. I'm almost a dermatologist, so I did a lot of cancer. My focus was a lot of into like the cancer surgery, and a lot of these surgeries in the face that we dealt with. So, and there's a lot of cosmetic. Even if it wasn't cosmetic surgery, you need to consider cosmetic things when you're doing that surgery, like around nose and eyes, etc., because you need to be able to remove the stuff they want to remove, but still needs to look decent afterwards. And so, and I felt that that was really fun. So I had had an opportunity to work a little bit with the plastic surgery, reconstructive surgery department here in Stockholm, and that's something I enjoyed. And during that time, also when having small kids growing up, and you had to patch some holes and
Hmm.
fix like teddy bears, whatever that lost something, whatever buttons on your shirts or whatever. So I sort of always realized like I like that sort of when it's like tiny and you need to be detailed and want it to look
Yep.
nice. So that's maybe a secret talent that I sort of actually enjoy fixing things with clothes and stuff, and bring out and have quite a lot of threads and needles and stuff, and enjoy actually fixing things. At this point, I have some people at work that drop stuff in my office, like, "Yeah, can you fix this button? Can you fix this for me?" It's like, "Yeah, sure."
That's
I'll bring it
awesome,
over,
man.
give it a shot.
That's
So
funny because I share that talent. Like my grandmother taught me how to sew when I was like 5 6 years old, and it's a skill like for life. You know what I mean? Like
mm,
once you know the concept, I mean, you can obviously improve it over time, but once you know the concept of you can fix anything like buttons, like you said. Eventually, I got a sewing machine too, and
mm,
so I don't use it as much anymore. But we used to make stuff like pillows. I used to like make like customized clothing and stuff, and like cut things off of one thing and put it onto another thing. So yeah, that's funny that we both share that. Um, Next question. So if you had to choose one to lift with, to train with for the rest of your life, between flywheels, dumbbells, or barbells, which would you choose?
oh, that's tricky.
Mm-hmm.
Because I mean, I don't know if I'm going to be doing powerlifting forever, but I'm doing it now and I try to be competitive. That sport is about lifting weights or bars, so that's something I need to have in my program, because with the balance and being like accustomed to the weight on your back, and there's a lot of like also psychological aspect, like for squats, for example. I'm always dead scared when I get heavy on the squats. Almost all people, I mean, you can see fantastic power lifters with super strong squatters, and there's still maybe a lot of them are a little bit like afraid, almost like, and intimidated by the weights. And to me that's a fairly big mental aspect. So I probably like, I had to say weights because I want to. I mean, now I'm prepping for European Championships here in March, and I want to get on the podium this year. And it's pretty fierce competition. So like, I wouldn't be able to like. I could probably build my strong. as good with only using the flywheels, but I wouldn't have, it's a lot of technical aspects as well when it comes to like
Mhm.
actually lifting the weight. So in that perspective, like we're talking about 3 to 5 years, I would say like, yeah, I need the weights. I need to stick with the weights. But looking more long term, if I look in all my life, I might not be doing powerlifting. Maybe I get an injury, maybe I get, something, train more for health or whatever down the line. You don't know what would happen. So if I had to take a bet for all my life, yeah, flywheel training comes pretty close, because I know that's okay. That's something I could do when I'm older. I could do it at home. If I lived and suddenly had to move, my wife gets a job, we have to move out into, I don't know, forest or whatever, super far out, or you know, or have to, live. Now we have in a house, but if we had to move to an apartment when I'm a senior, maybe whatever. So maybe it would be nice to have those flywheel training, and do that at home. And yeah, so that's a tricky question, but today it had to be weights because yeah, I want that podium.
Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna check up on you in a couple months and see how you did.
Yeah.
All right, here's a good one. This one's tricky. Do you believe in aliens?
Yeah, I think I do. Maybe not in the sense that they're flying around here, and that actually some of our politicians are aliens, hidden as, whatever, that type of like conspiracy thing, whatever. But I'm thinking like the universe is like infinite, and there's so many suns and planets, and I guess somewhere should be some sort of life, right? And there might be a chance that they're ahead of us. Maybe they're traveling, and maybe they're heading in our direction, whatever. And then they would be aliens, right? So, so yeah, another life in your universe. Yeah, probably somewhere. I mean, statistically, uh, infinity is a big thing, and somewhere around, out there might be, you know, and to some extent, we're aliens to them as well, right? So we might be the ones finding them. I don't know. So we are the aliens. So I don't know.
That's a good point. That's a good
Yeah.
point. See, you flipped it on me. You flipped it on me. All right. Um, if you could eat one meal for the rest of your life and not have to worry about the health implications, um, so you just stay the same physically, what would that meal be?
I mean, I'm a sucker for like the pasta stuff. So it would
Hmm.
be like spaghetti carbonara or maybe lasagna. But then I realized I really I had it more before. But I was a vegan before, and for like 10 years, and actually one of my favorite dishes is from that time. It's like spinach lasagna, which is really
Hmm.
nice. So maybe if I say lasagna, and yeah, it's practical in many ways. I mean, you can do big, you can can save for the day after, etc. And most people like it as well. So if you have friends coming over, you can always do lasagna. So yeah, maybe
Yep.
lasagna is good,
Like that.
and especially if you don't have to consider my health implications. So
Right. Yeah. All right. This is one that I ask, um, kind of because it's, I don't know, it just makes me think of myself when I got Twitter for the first time. I was just incorrectly using it. Like I was just constantly telling people like exactly what I was doing at that time. So do you remember do you remember what your first tweet or your first like Facebook post was? Like on your first social media, like what was your first post?
no, but I have to look it up now. When you said Twitter, I started. I mean, I didn't start. I mean, that long ago, because he's actually our marketing director at the company. He said like, yeah, you should probably have a Twitter account. I was like, yeah, I don't know. He's like, yeah, but it's good because people can interact with you and you can discuss training. It's like, it's good, because he was actually starting for the company a Twitter account. We didn't have a Twitter account. So he said like, yeah, but it's probably good if you also have one, because then you can interact and whatever. So I actually just started it for the company, and then Yeah, and I sort of enjoyed it, and so it was very focused like on training and Exxentric when I started it, and it still is really. And I'm not super active. Read quite a bit and use it a little bit more maybe for news today. Follow like events like Ukraine, etc., like stuff like that. You can
Mhm.
follow up and see what happens over there, etc. But yeah, but you definitely, yeah, I really need to check. It's probably something embarrassing, you
Yeah.
know.
That's how mine was. Like I got mine when I was, I think, in college, like 20. I think it was like 2010. But yeah, it was like my first tweet was all I would do was like I'm eating Chick-fil-A or working on homework. It's just like nobody cares. Like what now? What I tweet is like actually like valuable information. But for probably like the first 2 years I had Twitter, it was just random events of my life and like what I was doing. So it's always funny to see if people remember that. Here's one. Do you remember your first cell phone? What model was your first cell phone?
Yeah, it was an Ericsson, being from Sweden, and Ericsson they made cell phones back then. They were actually, I think, actually the first cell phone was an Ericsson, and then they hooked up with Sony, so it was Sony Ericsson for a while, and
Yeah.
then they stopped. And then they stopped doing it. It was back then with Nokia and Ericsson and Motorola was the big
Hmm.
brands, and Ericsson was pretty big. I know we had when I was probably like 7 years old when my dad got his first like mobile phone for the car. Actually, when it actually
Oh,
was in the car,
the
was a car
car
phone.
phone.
So you
Yeah.
had this like big thing and then you have this big battery pack, so you could
Yeah, it
take
was
it out with
huge.
that big, like look like almost like a gasoline, super
Yeah.
heavy big battery and the phone on top. But that's actually, I mean, that's like 40 years ago. So it's like amazing. So I think that was an Ericsson. So I think actually my first was an Ericsson. I remember I was around like 16, 17 or something when I had it. So, I mean, today, I mean, kids today would just laugh. I mean, they have cell
Yeah.
phones now when they're like 4, or whatever.
It's
They have
crazy,
their
man.
iPhones when they're like in
Yeah.
kindergarten. So,
It's nuts. All right, a couple more here. Um, Growing up, what was your dream job?
I want to be a fighter pilot.
Nice.
Obviously, thanks to Top Gun. But I think Top Gun came out. I think I was around like 15 or something when Top Gun came out, and I felt like, yeah, I want to fly an airplane like that. I want to be a fighter pilot. I
Yeah.
actually did some. Actually did, and it was actually a goal for quite so many years. I looked up like the recruitment process, and I watched all the documentaries, and I read up on flying, and I even sort of. I think the Air Force have some. They have like sort of summer camp for kids that wants to be pilots, whatever. So I signed up for that, etc. So it was actually quite long that was a plan for me, sort of for a couple of years. It stuck with me, but then I dropped it later on. Realized some other things, and other things became important, etc. But it was a dream for quite some time.
That's
Um,
dope.
uh,
All right, so last one right here. You're about to go to your next competition. You're walking out, getting ready to train, getting ready to lift, excuse me. What song are you listening to get you hyped up for that big lift to put you on the podium?
yeah. I actually have a playlist with a lot of these. What's funny, where I have a few different songs that I listen to when I hype up, and the funny thing is that they're so different. Some are super, heavy hip hop. Some are rock. Some are even like pop. That are just something about that song that makes me hype. When you listen to them, it's like, yeah, is this really on the same person's list? For like they are very different. But
Yeah.
just to give you an answer, I would probably go with something with like um, Jedi Mind Tricks, for example, hip hop. They had some collabs with German hip hoppers, Snow Goons. That they had some pretty cool songs as well. Those are on my list. But there are also some puppets, also some stuff that I would never listen to otherwise. And my kids laugh like, "Yeah, do you have this in your playlist for real?" It's like, "Yeah, but I like it when I'm about to lift. There's something about it." Yeah.
That's awesome, man. All right, so before I let you go, man, I just want to thank you so much for jumping on here, man. We've been going for like an hour and a half, so I really appreciate your time, and especially with the time difference working with me. So it was great to have you on here. Before I let you go, tell us kind of where we can find you. Tell them your Twitter so we can go look at what your first tweet was. All
Yeah.
the different social medias that we can connect with you on.
Yeah, I'm this super boring guy. I will always go with my name, so it's like Fredrik Correa everywhere, like Instagram, Twitter, sometimes with a dot or whatever if it's taken. But Fredrik Correa, you'll find me. And then obviously Exxentric.com if you want to look up our products or whatnot. But I guess that's the easiest to find me. On my Instagram, it's mainly about my own training, like a little bit on my hobbies, right? So I don't post tons of eccentric stuff there. So it's mainly about my, powerlifting. So fairly boring content if you're not into that. And then some other hobbies. I do some dynamic practical shooting. So post a little bit about that. And then I got a motorcycle license last year and got a motorcycle. So now I'm posting a little bit about that. So that's basically my hobbies that I post there. And then Twitter is the more professional. So if you want to interact and discuss, that could be a venue. But I get DMs all over. On so whatever suits you, right? Or obviously you can email me. You find me. It's like fredrik.correa@exxentric.com. And happy for you if somebody asks, any question or whatever regarding training or our products, whatever, you can always reach out there.
Awesome, man. Appreciate your time.
Oh, thanks for having me. It was great. And time flew, and you said some things I couldn't really follow up on, and you moved on to the next question. So I have all these things like, yeah, but we didn't have time to talk about that and that and that. But yeah, that's I was good.
Hey,
Thanks.
maybe we'll do a part two. We'll do a part two in maybe
Yeah, we'll
a
see.
couple months from now.
Yeah, let the audience decide. I'm going to take some notes, but I think I have some things I want to follow up on. I really wanted to follow up to when you talked about doing overload with that handle. I had so much to talk about there, and then it's like, then we went away to another question. So,
Ah,
I'll make some notes and we'll see. If people want to hear more, I'm happy to jump on. That's for sure.
love it, man. Thank you.
Mm.
And that was episode 10 with CEO and co-founder of Exxentric, Fredrik Correa. Awesome conversation. Great dude. Really love talking with that guy. I could have talked for hours with him about training and flywheels and all of his background. He's just a really interesting guy with a ton of information to offer. So if you guys like this episode, be so kind to leave it a review, rate it, give it feedback on whatever platform you're listening to. That really will help me grow the show and help more listeners find this as a resource for them to add to their training toolbox. So again, thank you so much for your support. I appreciate you guys listening. Make sure you follow Fredrik and Exxentric on all social platforms, and we'll see you guys again next week for another episode.